Hey, what's up? It's time for lecture number 3 on blood. So what have we done already? We talked about general things about blood, general structure, about blood plasma, and then we talked about red blood cells, erythrocytes. Last time we talked also about, we finished with white blood cells, the leukocytes. And today, in this third lecture, we got to talk about the final formed element, the smallest of them all, which are the platelets, the little discs, the little plates. You can see a couple of them pictured on the screen here. I can see at least 5 here. 2 are labeled already. There's another one right there, another one right there, another one right there. Nice little purplish cell fragments. They have a lot of chemicals in them that are involved in coagulation. So because they're involved in coagulation or clotting, they're often called thrombocytes. Thrombo means clot. So literally thrombocyte is a clot cell. However, bear in mind the site is kind of inappropriate because it is not a cell. It's just a little piece of a cell. Normally in the blood, there's several 100,000 of these per microliter, about 150 to 400,000. I like to remember it this way. I like to think about red blood cells as being about 5 million. Platelets, around 500,000. I know it's not. I know that's a little high, but the fives go well here. And then white blood cells around 5,000 per microliter, of course. So 5 million, 500,000, 5,000. And those numbers aren't exact, but they're close enough to give us an idea of the relative quantities of these different formed elements. Platelets will hang out in the blood for about 12 days or so. We'll make new ones all the time. We'll talk about that production in just a moment. Let's look at a quick pic here. All right. This lady has a problem where she is not coagulating blood properly. You can see all the little petechiae, little red marks there. And obviously you can figure out what formed element she is deficient in, and then figure out why it's manifesting like this. And we'll talk about that a little more in class. Okay, making platelets. Platelet production is called thrombopoiesis. This name is kind of a misnomer when you look at what it literally means. Because we already met poiesis. We talked about hemopoiesis, which is blood cell making, erythropoiesis, and leukopoiesis. Now we got thrombopoiesis, which, by the way, is part of part of hemopoiesis. Since hemopoiesis is making all the blood cells, it's going to include thrombopoiesis. Now, thrombo literally means clot. So literally this word is clot production, clot synthesis. But that's not what it actually refers to. It refers to the production of thrombocytes, or better yet, platelets. Okay, so the production of platelets occurs, of course, in the red bone marrow, which we already know we got in the axial skeleton, in the girdles, in the proximal epiphyses of the humerus and the femurs. So it starts with the hemocytoblast, of course. All blood cell production starts with the hemocytoblast. Goes through a variety of stages. We end up with this really big cell called a megakaryocyte. We see one right there. And little pieces break off of it, and those little pieces are platelets. So platelets aren't real cells. They're fragments. They are a nucleate. They are an organelle. They don't have nuclei. They don't have organelles. Down here we see a picture of the red bone marrow. Here is a megakaryocyte. He is sticking little arms into the bloodstream, and the force of the bloodstream shears off the little pieces of platelets. Okay, we're going to encounter platelets more in a minute. We got to step back and look at something called hemostasis. Hemostasis is how we respond to blood vessel damage. We don't want to bleed too much. Hemostasis prevents that. It keeps the blood still. So, 3 basic phases to hemostasis. Anytime a blood vessel is injured, the first thing that happens is something called vascular spasm. What occurs there is constriction of the blood vessel. Then we make something called a platelet plug, which is a immediate temporary patch. It's like, putting a piece of gum on a leak. You don't want that to last, but maybe for a second it'll keep it from leaking. Then we have a stronger patch that's more long lasting. Maybe like putting some duct tape over the leak to replace the gum or put it over the gum. Now, the duct tape isn't going to stay there forever, and the clot isn't going to stay there forever, but it's something that's stronger and more durable while repairs are taking place. So those are the 3 stages of hemostasis. We squeeze, we plug, we clot. Squeeze, plug, clot. Let's go through them one at a time. All right, so vascular spasm. When a blood vessel is cut, the damaged cells. All right, look at that. We got connective tissue, epithelial cells, smooth muscle cells, blood cells. Those damaged cells release chemicals that act as local vasoconstrictors. So the smooth muscle is going to constrict. This is going to decrease blood flow and thus decrease blood pressure. That's going to make us more likely to be able to do repairs easily, and also it's going to help limit the loss of blood. Okay. That's the first phase. It happens almost immediately. Now, these phases don't necessarily happen in order. They're kind of all occurring at the same time. So meanwhile, platelet plug formation is going to take place in response to damage as well. So what we're looking at here is the inside of a blood vessel. And here's the lumen of the blood vessel right there. It says lumen of blood vessel. And right over here, we had an area of damage. Now we know lining the blood vessel, of course, there's simple squamous epithelium. We remember that from A&P1. I know you guys got all that A&P1 info in your brain waiting to be accessed. And underneath this simple squamous epithelium, of course, we have some connective tissue, always connective tissue under an epithelium. And that connective tissue, of course, has collagen. And when collagen is exposed and platelets bump into it, platelets become active and they become sticky. They stick to the collagen and they start to stick to each other. This is going to be the beginning of our plug. Now, here's where it gets kind of cool. When platelets get active, not only do they become sticky, they start releasing chemicals. Some of those chemicals enhance vascular spasm. Some of those chemicals play a role in clotting. But most importantly for right now, platelets are releasing chemicals that attract more platelets. So more platelets come, get turned on, get sticky, become part of the plug, release chemicals, which attract more platelets, which get turned on, get sticky, which become part of the plug, and release more chemicals, which attract more platelets. Do you remember what this is, this type of process? This is positive feedback. And the value of it here is it builds the platelet plug fast. But I know you're wondering right now. I know I can imagine your brain is wondering right now. What prevents the platelet plug from just growing and growing and growing and growing? And here's the thing. The platelet plug is restricted to the injury site because normal, healthy cells, so all these cells up here where my cursor is, all these cells, these 2 right here, normal, healthy cells, like this one, for example, this one is labeled intact endothelium. Normal healthy cells release a chemical called prostacyclin, which prevents platelets from sticking. So what this means is platelets cannot stick to healthy cells. This restricts them to the site of injury, which is really good. So this is going on at the same time as vascular spasm. It is providing some immediate blockage for the damage. Okay, let's keep on going. What do we do next? Well, we got to make a blood clot. And by the way, it's already started its formation. Everything's going on at once. This is a blood clot right here. Look at all those fibers, all those strings. A blood clot is a net. It is a mesh of a protein called fibrin. And this net, this web, traps more platelets, as well as a lot of red blood cells. And that's what forms a blood clot. So to make a blood clot, we got to have a chemical called fibrin, a protein called fibrin, which makes a net, traps formed elements in it, and that's a blood clot. Okay, but we got to figure out, where's the fibrin come from? Because you probably don't want fibrin normally floating in around your blood. If you did, you would constantly be clotting, and that's not good. So we know a blood clot is made out of fibrin. Now we got to figure out, where does the fibrin come from? And here's the thing. Fibrin, which is an active protein, it is doing something, it is involved in clot formation. Fibrin is made from a precursor, an inactive version called fibrinogen. So you always have fibrinogen in your blood. Fibrinogen is made by the liver. When in doubt, if I ask you what makes something, you're like, I got no idea. Guess the liver. Okay, so fibrinogen is always in your blood. When you need to make a clot, fibrinogen is converted into fibrin. Fibrin forms a web, a mesh, traps formed elements, and we get a clot. All right, so we're kind of working backwards here. How do we do this conversion? This conversion is mediated by another protein in your blood called thrombin, the clot protein. So when thrombin is present, it turns fibrinogen into fibrin. Remember, we always have fibrinogen in the blood, made by the liver, waiting to get turned on. Fibrin then forms a net, a mesh, and traps formed elements and forms a clot. So to make a clot, we need fibrin. To make fibrin, we convert fibrinogen. And that conversion is done by thrombin. All right. The obvious question we got to answer next is, well, where does the thrombin come from? So let's do that. Thrombin is made from something called prothrombin, which is basically its inactive version. Prothrombin is always in the blood, made by the liver again. So if we need to make a clot, we need fibrin. To get fibrin, we need thrombin. To get thrombin, we need a chemical called prothrombin activator. And I know you know where we're going here. Well, where does that come from? And that comes from two different pathways, all right? There's two mechanisms for making prothrombin activator, PTA. Two mechanisms, two pathways. There's one called the intrinsic path, which is initiated by platelets, which are inside the blood vessel, all right? So remember, when platelets get turned on, they start releasing chemicals, and some of those chemicals help create prothrombin activator. Meanwhile, prothrombin activator is also made via the extrinsic path. This is initiated by perivascular damage. Peri, around, so vascular, blood vessel, so things around the blood vessel. So tissue cells around the blood vessel, when they're damaged, they contribute to prothrombin activator. Now, if you're going to damage a blood vessel, you're going to damage both it and the surrounding tissue. So these paths are always going to be happening together in your body. Question is, why have two paths? And let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of both and see how they work together. All right, check out this big pathway on the right-hand side here. My cursor is dancing over it. At the bottom, it says cross-linked fibrin polymer. That basically is referring to the web, the mesh of fibrin I was talking about. If I go up, I got fibrin, which is made from fibrinogen, thanks to thrombin, which is made from prothrombin, thanks to prothrombin activator. Notice there are two pathways, extrinsic over here, intrinsic on the left where my red rectangle is. I got bad news. First of all, you don't have to know all the steps of this intrinsic path. Sorry. But what we got to know is that there are many steps. And there's a disadvantage and an advantage to many steps. The disadvantage is that with more steps, it requires more time. The advantage is with more steps, you can end up making more. Think about a pyramid. All right. Step one creates 2 components, which create 4, which create 8, which create 16. So the more steps you have, the more you end up making. So intrinsic path, disadvantage, it's slow. Advantage, it allows for making a lot of prothrombin activator. All right. What about the extrinsic path? The extrinsic path, we now see it in the rectangle on the right. And the extrinsic path is going to have fewer steps. Thus, the advantage is it's going to be faster. But with fewer steps, you're not going to be able to have as much amplification. You cannot make as much. So these two pathways work together pretty nicely to make the PTA, almost immediately and eventually in large amounts, which is what we need. All right, a couple other things we got to point out. As we look at both these pathways, intrinsic, extrinsic, and then the common pathway down here, notice that calcium is playing a role in many spots. So make sure you are getting enough dietary calcium. Also, notice there's a lot of Roman numerals. These are different protein factors involved in the process. And a lot of these are going to be produced in the liver. That's why I have a liver right there. So a lot of coagulation factors are going to be made in the liver. Now notice I spelled coagulation with a K right there. And the thing is, there's a reason I did this. I'm not misspelling coagulation. The thing is, in order for the liver to make the coagulation factors, the liver needs vitamin K. Vitamin K is necessary for coagulation. That's actually where the name for vitamin K comes from. It comes from coagulation, which I think in the word in Dutch, you don't have a hard C in Dutch, so you get a K. Anyway, a couple things you need. You need vitamin K and you need calcium. So make sure you're getting both. All right. Now, once you make a clot, once you make that mesh of fibrin, it's kind of gooey. And you don't want a gooey clot. Gooiness is not good. So what's going to happen is within the clot, there is something called actinomyosin. And I know you remember actin and myosin from AMP1, from muscle contraction. Of course you do. And the contractile proteins in the platelets within the mesh of the fibrin of the clot, they contract, they retract, they squeeze. And they squeeze out some juice. The juice is called serum. This also makes the wound smaller. The edges of the wound get drawn closer together, which makes it less likely to break and makes it easier for connective tissue, smooth muscle, and epithelial tissue to grow and recover the damaged area. And eventually we'll do that. We'll regrow the tissue. Once we've regrown the normal blood vessel wall, we got to destroy the clot. The clot is destroyed by a chemical called plasmin. Plasmin is an active version of a normal plasma protein made by the liver called plasminogen. And plasminogen is turned into plasmin by a chemical called tissue plasminogen activator, which will be present in abundant quantities by the time tissue repair is done. So that sums up coagulation, which is a big part of hemostasis, alongside platelet plug formation and vascular spasm. Okay, I know you were excited. I know you are excited right now hearing all about all this. If you're getting underwhelmed as you listen to this, let me know. Quick question for you here. Read this, come up with an answer. I will pick on you and ask you personally in class. All right, so just to add a little more things about clot and clot growth. Obviously, we want clots to grow when they're supposed to grow in response to damage. But the thing is, we always have these chemicals, prothrombin and fibrinogen, in our blood. All right? We don't want to have too many procoagulants in our blood, things that turn those chemicals on and make clots. So we always have a balance between the procoagulants in our blood and chemicals that are anticoagulants. And under normal situations, the anticoagulants win and prevent any turning on of this process in normal healthy tissue. But in response to broken blood vessels and the production of PTA, procoagulants win. Now, why do we just have a clot in one spot? Why isn't the clotting happen everywhere? Well, the procoagulants are quickly removed by blood, quickly dispersed and diluted, and also quickly inactivated. Now, if you upset this balance, running these processes, you can get clot formation when you shouldn't. And we're going to talk about a couple situations where that happens. So if the blood vessel lining is too rough, you may not make prostacyclin. Remember, prostacyclin keeps platelets away. So platelets might start sticking to the blood vessel lining and start turning on the coagulation process. If blood is pooling too much, like if you're sitting on a long airplane ride, if you're flying to New Zealand, and if you're sitting there and blood is pooling in your superficial leg veins, what might happen is you might end up with too many procoagulants in one spot. Whereas normally you disperse them throughout your body. If blood is pooling, you get too many in one spot. And then they can turn each other on. All right. Some more situations that impair coagulation. Let's start up here with a nice little drug, an anticoagulant drug. So this drug is, and you may have heard of it, warfarin, I don't even know how to pronounce it. It is a vitamin K blocker. So it prevents the liver from using vitamin K in order to make the necessary clotting factors. All right, obviously you need platelets in order to have good coagulation. If you had too few platelets, something called thrombocytopenia, that would be bad because you wouldn't be able to, platelets are essential for the chemicals for many of the clotting factors. Platelets are impaired by aspirin. So aspirin can prevent clotting by hindering platelet activity. If you were taking too many antibiotics and killing your gut bacteria, your normal gut bacteria, that could be bad because your normal gut bacteria make up about 50% of your vitamin K supply. If this was your liver, this is one ugly liver right here. If this was your cirrhotic liver, your liver would not be working properly. Your hepatocytes, your liver cells, would not be able to make enough clotting factors. If you were on the totally fat-free diet, that would be bad too. Because if you don't have enough fat, you can't absorb enough fat-soluble vitamins. And remember, one of your fat-soluble vitamins is vitamin K. All right, what else we got here? Aha, questions for you. 2 questions for you guys here. I'm going to ask the first row of the lecture room. These 2 questions. I'll know if you've listened to this if you're not sitting in the first row. Some more questions right here. Read them, come up with an answer. More right here. Another 7. That's all. Another 4 right here. More practice questions. And one more topic, no more practice questions. We can also talk about what happens if we do end up losing blood. If that hemostasis doesn't occur properly. Well, if we lose more than 10% of our blood, the real dilemma we face is a drop in blood pressure. We don't want blood pressure to drop such that it decreases the necessary blood flow to our big, beautiful brains. So we got to deal with that. We got to maintain blood pressure. How do we do it? Well, we turn on our fight or flight branch of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch. And 2 big things are going to happen here. The sympathetic nervous system is going to cause the release of norepinephrine onto the heart. So the heart is going to beat more rapidly and more forcefully. That's going to raise blood pressure. So in response to a big loss of blood, heart rate and force of contraction go up to maintain blood pressure. Also, we are going to have sympathetic neurons release norepinephrine onto the smooth muscle in our blood vessels, our arteries, and our veins. And that smooth muscle is going to cause vasoconstriction, generalized vasoconstriction. And that vasoconstriction is also going to raise blood pressure. All right, great news, folks. We are done with blood. See you next time when we do the heart. Bye-bye.